Welcome to Talk Advocacy To Me, the podcast that dives deep into the world of customer advocacy and loyalty. I'm your host, Liz Richardson, and I'm joined by my dynamic co-host, Deena Zenyk. We're the co-founders of Captivate Collective, and we're here to spark your curiosity and fuel your passion for all things customer advocacy. Each episode, we tackle hot and pressing customer engagement topics for the advocurious to the seasoned pro. So let's dive in and talk advocacy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Advocacy To Me, where we talk about one specific question relating to the customer engagement and advocacy field. As always, I am Liz Richardson. I'll be your host today as we dive into a great topic, which is how do you build a business case for advocacy that the C-suite can hear? I have my cohort, or my
Call me what you want, Liz. I'm all yours.
What do I want to call you? I have Deena here. Deena, as my co-host. Thank you. My co-host Deena Zenyk is here with me, co-founder of Captivate Collective. We're just co-everything, I think. Yeah, pretty much. But we are so excited today because we get to bring not only just a really wonderful practitioner and leader in this field of customer advocacy, but also someone I think Deena and I both consider a friend. So we're very excited to have Cristina Melluzzi with us here today. Cristina, I am going to let you say hi, but first I'll do the yucky part of talking about you so you don't have to talk about yourself on this call and boast about this awesome resume that you have in the field. You have over 20 years of global marketing experience with Fortune 100 organizations, and you have a reputation for building a large advocacy organization from scratch, from the ground up. You are recognized as a top 100 global customer marketing and advocacy strategist. So congratulations on that. And I know that you have worked with a lot of big organizations such as Cisco and Microsoft, Dell, HPE. So you've got that enterprise record behind you. And I think a lot of people in this field have looked up to you for a while and looked at your work and said, how can we emulate that? And we are really excited to get a little bit behind the curtain of how you went about that journey and what it took.
Oh, thank you, Liz. Well, I feel flattered and also humbled to be here with both of you, because the honest truth is, I have had an extensive background in enterprise and in tech, but actually it was when I met both of you that really inspired me. When was that? Like 8-9 years ago now, when I first met with you both and heard what you were doing at Influitive. It just really inspired me around how we could do things better and how you were thinking about customer advocacy, customer marketing, and this whole landscape. And I think you both have been so pivotal in shifting this whole landscape for lots of companies. And surprisingly, people look at enterprises and often assume that enterprise companies have it all figured out, but it actually couldn't be the truth, as you both very well know from working with us on lots of projects, and lots of other clients, no doubt. So I'm very excited to have this chat with you today. I definitely don't have all the answers, but I think it's good conversation. I think we can all learn from each other, and I think that's the most important thing about being in our world, is just really being active listeners and learners, and learning from people around us that are figuring things out and making mistakes and evolving and finding better ways to do things. So looking forward to the chat.
Thank you, Cristina. That's great. And I feel like anytime we get on a call with you, people naturally start asking you questions. They just naturally start asking you a lot of questions. So for any of you out there who do have questions, who are watching the live stream right now, if you do want to drop them for Cristina, even when we don't answer them here, I know she would be happy to come back and try to answer them herself later. But you're right, Cristina. I wasn't smiling from working with you. I was smiling because enterprise can be quite hefty, which means sometimes they actually can fall behind in what they are doing because it is so difficult to move the barriers, the obstacles, the challenges, such a large organization. And I think that brings some weight to when you're able to make movement in an enterprise. You've had to go through a lot of hoops in order to do that, which means you have something to share with everyone, whether they're enterprise or not, on how to go about jumping through those hoops. So today I'm really just excited for you to share with people how you were able to get that buy-in from day one all the way to having a massive advocacy team. And I know how that awareness of your work went all the way to the C-suite, all the way to the very top by the end, especially with your work at Cisco. So maybe let's start at day one, Cristina. How did you start to lay out a vision for what you wanted to do?
Yeah, so when I started at Cisco, I suppose naively, I went into the organization thinking that the company would have had a lot of these things figured out, right? I thought they would have had a customer marketing practice, a customer stories team. I just thought they would have a lot of the things figured out. But what I learned quite rapidly is that because of what you just described, Liz, it's very, very difficult to move in an organization of 80, 90,000 employees and hundreds of thousands of customers. So I suppose the first thing that took me as a surprise was the lack of structure, the lack of kind of a programmatic approach to customer marketing, and there wasn't really a practice, to be honest. So I think the first thing that I did day one for me, week one, month one, was really about spending time with customers and hearing what they had to say about Cisco. And I think what was really fascinating to me very early on is that people really love Cisco. Like, they're so attached to the brand, and that's true for a lot of brands, right? That's true. You get a lot of people that just become so naturally passionate about the brand that that they've invested in, that they almost feel like part of your company. They're like an extension of your company. So I think that was the first thing that I discovered, and I think I've told this story many times, and it still kind of blows my mind, is I discovered that a lot of our customers had the Cisco logo tattooed to them. And so that was like a moment of thinking, oh wow, like there's something in this. There's a story here, right? There's something that the company isn't really aware of, and we need to kind of see how we can tap into that. And there were some programs at that time. There was like Cisco Champions, and there was the community, but it was all kind of like not connected, and there was no one really focusing on it. So the first thing that I did was really start to campaign around the company, around this story, and I think that fundamentally is what got everyone's attention. That was the first thing that got everyone's attention, was this is amazing. How did we not know about this? Why are we not like doing more to kind of like build some kind of program around these people? So first things first was campaigning around the whole organization, and really starting from, like you described, really going all the way up to the C-suite and the CMO at the time, and thinking about how could we help these customers feel like an extension of our company more? How could we bring them more into the company? And then the other thing that was really key for me, and this is like really what we're here to talk about today, is how do you get the attention? It's not just about, yes, you need to have that emotional connection, you need to have that story, which is that story that I uncovered. But beyond that, it was really understanding, what do the C-suite care about? What are the things that are really troubling them? What changes are they trying to implement? So that was really, really important to learn. And I think, some people in our world, not necessarily as much now, but when I started out in the world of customer marketing, we're really focused on sort of like tactical things like social shares and customer stories and references, and not connecting it to the bigger picture. So fundamentally, what I think needs to happen is you need to have the right conversation with the most senior leaders in your company to find out, what are the things that they're being measured on. Is it churn, right? Are we losing customers to a competitor? What does that look like? What does our churn rate look like? What do our investors care about? So you need to in order to be credible, you need to have be able to have that conversation around those key business objectives. And I think that's where some of the disconnect has happened in customer marketing and customer advocacy, is that they're doing all the things like the swag and the gamification and all that and the social shares, and that's all important stuff, but it's only important if the C-suite understand what that actually means to the business. So you have to start there. I think that's really the key learning that I had very early on. And it's even what I'm thinking about now as I embark on my next adventure, which we'll come on to probably later this week, is really learning what is important to the business. Like, what are the major things that the business is trying to solve? Is it that the brand is and they're trying to be seen as more of a player, more as a competitive player in the field? How can the customer marketing and advocacy organization fundamentally have a stake in that? So those are the kind of things. It's being able to talk the language of the C-suite, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I want to just roll back on that a little bit, Cristina. I think you're right that initially, let's say a little while back, more of the focus was on those tactical elements. We've seen a huge surge probably in the last few years of trying to up level that conversation. And then they are trying to find new ways to measure that impact, right? So I want to talk about getting to understand what is bothering the C-suite. So we'll go in and we'll say, okay, you need to tie into something much larger. What is the focus? Well, the focus is always related to net retention of some kind, whether that's new logo acquisition or upsell, cross sell, or retention, right? So at the end of the day, everyone's like, well, we all know what they care about. That's ultimately what it is. But there is nuance to that and the focus of the C-suite at any given time, and that does change. Like you said, it could be a particular competitor, it could be adoption of a specific feature or product. How did you go about, especially when you were new, how did you go about understanding what was of most importance at that time to the C-suite, and how far up did you go?
Yeah, so that's really good point, and I think it's interesting that you highlight the fact that it has shifted a lot. I think for me, it was really the biggest advocate I had at that time was the CMO, and so having a CMO that understood the impact that the community, the advocates, the customers that you spend a significant amount of time in engaging, that the impact they can have on some of the goals that the company has was really, really critical. So I think that was the luxury I had, was a CMO that understood this and prioritized it. So that was, I was lucky, to be quite honest. That's not always the case. So I think you can have like some CMOs that are very focused on brand, some that are very focused on demand. It depends on the background that they've come from. And I think there are, more CMOs that are coming through now that I see anyway, and all the way up to the CEO, that are understanding that in order to retain customers, to drive loyalty, and to reach some of their big goals that are going to ultimately impact the share price and shareholders and investors, that ultimately, these areas need to be prioritized. I think that's really, really key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Deena, just to get your voice in this mix too around measurements, because when we do our CAP cert, Deena is usually the one talking about measuring the impact of advocacy. And we do talk about understanding what's happening at the C-suite. And then there's Cristina's point about having a champion. So just want to hear your voice on that. And what about if you don't have a champion, perhaps?
Yeah. A lot of what we talk about with our clients and with the people who come to learn in our CAP cert courses is to your point, Cristina, about people being quite tactical about what they're doing with customer advocacy, and we call that advocate activity. And a lot of folks have stopped short at measuring the amount of advocate activity. Now that could be how engaged, your engagement rates in a platform. You could call that advocate activity, or like, we need 10 case studies this quarter. And it just is like a step beyond that will get the attention of, the people who mind the money for the organization, instead of thinking about, oh, we need 10 case studies, taking it a step or two further to, well, what does that really mean for the organization? How do case studies really move the needle for the organization? And then taking some ownership, a stake of ownership of that follow through success, always with the eye, to your point, Cristina and Liz, of trying to connect what you're doing to those big ticket activities of adoption, retention, growth.
Yeah. And I think, the big thing I've learned as well, when we're talking about, it's not just about yes, the measurement is key. Measurement is definitely key. And that's one thing that we absolutely shifted. We stopped talking about, to be quite frank, just acts of advocacy. And I actually tasked a team. I hired an amazing guy. Shout out to Tom Simpson. He's brilliant. He's not at Cisco anymore because another company snapped him up. But anyway, we formulated a team to actually really dive into what does this mean. Like, for example, how many touch points if an advocate is involved in an opportunity, what impact does that have on the deal, the velocity of the deal, the size of the deal, how quickly it closed. Like, those are some of the things that we actually built a whole framework around it. And when you can start to talk in that fashion, then you get some credibility and people start to listen. It does take a lot. You have to be very, very serious, and you have to be very driven, and quite you have to be able to ruthlessly prioritize when you speak to the sales organization, because sales are quite touchy around some of these things, and rightly so, right? Let's be honest. Yeah. But you have to be able to really show them how you're helping them, but also enable that collaboration so that they know that in order for you to help them drive more pipeline, close more deals, accelerate deals, etc., they need to also have a stake in what you're doing, which is commit something on the number. And it can be, some companies, and we toyed with it as well, is, can you attribute a percentage of that deal to your customer advocacy, customer marketing initiatives? So that's kind of like where this world needs to evolve. We need to move away from talking about kind of like tactics and like acts of advocacy and etc. and social shares, and really having those conversations and collaborating really closely with the chief revenue officer, with the sales organization, like those types of folks, because that's where you build credibility to then, like to your point, Deena, if you need, you need money, you need resources, you need budget in order to, build successful programs. And in order to sustain those programs, you need that continuous buy-in from your leadership team.
Cristina, it just occurred to me, it's like thinking about your organization as a globe. And each of these departments is kind of a different country. They have a different culture. They speak a different language. And you need to familiarize yourself. Like, what is the culture of sales? Like you said, they're a little bit touchy. Sales is used to having all of the attribution for a deal. What language do they speak? What do they care about? Over to marketing, up to the C-suite. Think about them as different countries, different cultures, different languages, acclimatize to those different parts of the organization, and learn how to speak their language. The other piece that I just want to underline that you said, and you said it really quick there, because this was a bit of a revelation for me in kind of the last 6 to 8 months when someone shared this line of thinking with me, that your C-suite leader, look at where they came from. Look at what their job history is. Because their job history, just like all of us, informs our worldview at work. So if you have a CMO who came from sales, I mean, it's happened, it's possible, then that CMO has a sales mindset. So you don't necessarily need to learn how to talk to the CMO. You really want to figure out how to appeal to the sales leader inside that CMO. So look at the work history of the people that you are collaborating with at that upper echelon of the business, and that will give you your best kind of hints and chance of how to interact with them.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Deena. And, I think that's great that you highlighted that, because that was a big learning for me as well. I made many mistakes actually in preparing for meetings and not having the content right, and then thinking afterwards, if I'd have just focused on that area, I would have got that person's attention a little bit more. So I think that's so true, and really, really important to remember. And to add to that, I think the other thing that's key, and I think for people that are starting out in this journey and thinking about how can they have an impact, or perhaps they don't have an advocate or someone, a champion, let's say, like a CMO, what do you do then, right? And I think the answer is you don't have to start with a CMO. You have to go where the energy is what I always say. So if you find that there will be someone in the business that is passionate about what you're doing and believes in what you're doing, and it might be a case of, collaborating with that individual first, and then thinking about how do you eventually, make your way all the way up to the CMO or whoever it might be, the chief revenue officer or whoever the case may be. But I think that's really important as well, is not thinking that, oh my goodness, I have to go and speak to the CEO about this. It can be done in steps. And I think it's about going where the energy is and finding those internal champions that will back what you're trying to do.
This is all really good. And I love that snippet you just said, Cristina, about walking into meetings and walking out and realizing it didn't quite land because the content was not quite right. And I think there's some interesting debate maybe going on in the field right now of, is it that we are not bringing or putting our best foot forward often with customer engagement and advocacy initiatives? Or is it that the C-suite is, words that have been used, uneducated and don't understand the impact, and so are therefore maybe willfully ignoring or only seeing short-term value versus long-term value? We've heard this in the field. I want to get your take on that as someone who, you have worked with a lot of C-suite folks. Do they just not get it, Cristina, or are they just needing to hear the story a different way?
I think it's the latter of what you just said. I think they need to hear the story in a different way. I think that's the first thing. I think it's connecting it back to their priorities. And I think as marketing people, as communicators, I think some of us have the tendency to over communicate, right? I'm going to put my hand up and say I've been well and truly guilty of that, right? So I think it's about finding the right way to get your message across in a very clear and concise way and get to the point very, very quickly. And that's another thing when it comes to presenting your content. And like I said, very guilty of that myself, learned a lot through my, many companies that I've worked at. You've got to be able to get the message across quickly, because like everyone, our time is limited. And if you're in the C-suite, your time is even more limited because, you've got people breathing down your throat that, have an even bigger impact on the success of the company. And there's a lot of pressure on their shoulders for sure. So like there's pressure on all of our shoulders in different ways, but I think it's really important to be very, very clear and concise in what we're communicating and what it means to the company, and really to have some ruthless prioritization around when you go into a meeting, get to the point quickly, do it in 3 slides or less, in 1 slide if you can, so I think that's really, really important. And even down to how you email someone at that level, I think is really critical. Or if you Slack them, I'm learning all about Slack at the moment, not using Cisco WebEx anymore, but keep it brief, keep it punchy, get to the point, hit them between the eyes with the hard facts, get your quantitative feedback, qualitative feedback, and put that together and hit them in between the eyes with what does this actually mean for the company. And I think that's, one of my biggest learnings throughout my career, actually.
I'm going to throw a hard question out to all of us here, right? We work in an organization that typically does not own numbers that roll up all the way to revenue. So for instance, we may impact revenue. We may be attributed a piece of that to some degree. So we influence, but we typically don't own retention. We typically don't own demand. We typically don't own closed won. We are basically supporters. So we find our advocates, we bring them in, and then we support numbers owned by other parts of the organization. So when C-suite are making difficult decisions about what stays, what goes, et cetera, we may have seen a history, right, where it looks like supporting roles are more easily cut than starring roles. We'll call them starring roles. I'm background in theater, so you can't cut the starring roles and you don't have a show. So how do we come with that? What is that messaging that says no, it's actually not more important that we focus on the immediate reaper of some, let's say, more demand budget, right? Here is a supporting role. We don't own these numbers, so our story can be a little bit more difficult to tell. How
Yeah.
do we package that story to make sure that it is understood by someone who is looking very likely at dollars and cents? That is a bit of how they are seeing it. Is it that combination of qualitative and quantitative to create something really different and special in a way that we have those stories? Qualitative does tend to be our strength, right? Like we come in with the stories that, about tattoos on people's arms, about a life-changing experience for a customer. That's what we come with. It doesn't always neatly roll up to a dollars and cents story. What do you think we need to be doing or saying differently?
I think that's so interesting. It's something I've been paying a lot of attention to recently, actually. And I think, the world as we know it is constantly evolving, but we're going through a period of rapid evolution right now with the emergence of AI, right? And I think trust, we said this before, but this I think
Mm.
is so it's even more true now. Trust is at an all-time low. Trust is at an absolute all-time low. I think there's a lot of focus on product-led growth, and I think that's really going to be critical. There's going to be a lot of, that I think that it'd be interesting to see how, even SaaS businesses are really going to focus on product-led growth, but customer-led growth is going to be the key differentiator for the future. And I think ultimately, as we go through this rapid period of evolution where AI becomes the norm for us, like the internet was back in the whenever, I can't even remember now when we first got the internet. Was that the 90s? I don't know.
The 90s. Yeah, I think it was the 90s.
Yeah. But I'm sure you both remember, we're probably all showing our age here, but when the internet, like with the emergence of the internet, everyone was like, oh my goodness, this is terrifying. Like it was exciting, but it was also terrifying at the same time. And I think AI is a little bit of the same, right? And I think that's interesting. And I think the reason I'm saying this is because I think what's going to happen is the conversation has to fundamentally shift, because companies that prioritize customer-led growth, those are the companies that are going to be the most successful in the future, because those are the companies that are going to be able to retain their best customers. There's such a fight for retention. There's such a fight around demand. You think about all the investment in paid media and demand and things like that. It's just too much noise. There's just far too much noise going on. And I think customers are so bombarded. So I think one of the areas that companies will need to start to focus on, and this is where the conversation will fundamentally shift, is that you have to put your focus on your most loyal customers, because they will become your growth engine for the future. And I think that's where that conversation needs to shift. It needs to really get all the way up to the C-suite. There needs to be very, very confident leaders that need to be able to articulate that and then put a number behind it. And I think that's going to be the big shift that we'll all be seeing over the next few years.
Deena, that reminds me of customer powered enterprise, which we know was a message, that Mark Organ, founder of Influitive, had put out there a long time ago.
Years ago.
And I think, and it resonated so well then. And Cristina, I'm listening to you and you're like, you're absolutely right, especially with the emergence of AI, and where you will have a very difficult time understanding what is real and what is not real.
Mm-hmm.
But Deena, back to that. So we know we've been needing to do this. We know like that's the ultimate vision and goal. Why do you think people aren't fully on board yet?
I think one of the shortcomings, and this is something, Cristina, that I think you kind of masterfully navigated at Cisco. One of the shortcomings, even when we think of the customer-led growth as it relates to customer advocacy, talk advocacy to me, is this almost myopic focus on executive advocates, and executive advocates being the ones who really can move the needle for the business. Executive advocates as the one who are going to buy more and refer to their very important friends at their very important functions. what you did, Christina, was you put a lot of spotlight on the end user,
Yeah.
on the little guy.
Yep.
And then looked at that at scale, and of course broadened out and had executive advocates. But I think customer-led growth is really looking at the power and potential of all customers and how they can impact your business, not saying like, let's spend a ton of money on our cab and cut most of our customer advocacy programming for end users, because after all, they're just the people who use our products each day.
That is so true, Deena. And funnily enough, it reminds me of a conversation I had earlier today, right, where I was saying to someone, I think, some companies do this, and I think it's a genius idea, is when you've got grads that are fresh out of university, like how do you nurture grads to become early advocates for your brand, right? And it could be through your learning academy, right? So like lots of companies have learning academies, or like Cisco had Cisco Learning, like all the different companies have learning. And I think ultimately you need to bring people in early and help them build that emotional connection and trust with your brand, because then they fundamentally grow up with you, right? And I think that's really, really important too. And a shift that we should all be thinking about is, how do you build that loyalty very, very early on, before these people are even customers? But how can you actually have an impact on their lives in a positive way, so that one day, when they're, I don't know, a CTO or whatever it is, an IT manager, they'll think, oh, I know Freshworks, or I know Cisco, or I know Captivate, or whoever the case may be.
Yeah, super smart. It's thinking of, it's a long game. It's a longer play. But to your point, Christina, the companies of the not so distant future that will be the most successful are the ones who have their customers along for the ride. Look at COVID. All of a sudden, massive upswing in companies wanting to suddenly spin up customer programs to treat their current customers well. The ones who seem to sustain there had already invested in some sort of customer advocacy programming, not just spinning it up opportunistically.
Yep, absolutely.
So I'm going to bring us back a bit to the C-suite as we wrap up here. Cristina, I'm going to ask you some practical questions for our listeners. So if I am needing or feel like I am not getting budget, my budget's not growing, my team's not growing, I'm always an extra because I'm in customer engagement advocacy, what kind of story or message do I need to tell the next time I walk into either my leader or my leader's room to make my case?
Yeah. I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier. It's about having those credible conversations. It's not talking. So you might be responsible for a program or a particular project. It may, perhaps you're involved in a community as part of your customer marketing initiatives. It's really important to think about the impact that what you do has on the bigger picture. And I think, not just focusing on your area, but thinking about what impact does this have on the bigger picture, and then making sure that you're able to articulate that when you go and have a meeting with whoever, a director, senior director, VP, whomever, right? It's about being able to put it into their language. And I think knowing that up front is really important. You can find out a lot about people online, right? So preparation is really key. I think making sure, if you're going to meet with your CMO, do some research. Have they ever spoke at an event? Have they ever participated in a blog, in a webinar? There'll be tons of internal content on your SharePoint, or however it is you share content internally. Do your research, talk in their language, look at the presentations they prepare and replicate it. Talk back to them, be a mirror.
Wait, Christina, you mean they're people? They're like real people? That reminds me, as Deena and I used to teach a course, and we would say, guess what? Like, personas are very helpful, and they have a place, but they never tell you exactly who a person is or what is going to resonate and interest them. I love what you're saying there, because we talk a lot, when we talk about advocacy methodology, we talk a lot about discovering, nurturing, and activating. Well, we also talk about a advocacy professional, sort of being a middle manager of sorts. You are building relationships with your external customers, and you're building relationships with your internal customers, your stakeholders. If we look at the C-suite as a segment of those stakeholders, we need to do that work of discovery and nurture, just like we need to do it externally with our customers. But we often don't. Our time is so limited, right? But at the end of the day, getting that champion, and we've had so many discussions about internal buy-in, and almost everyone comes back to that idea of this internal champion, finding that person, and then how do we find them, nurture them, get them to believe in that vision, bring them along with us for that ride, is just as important as working with our customers on the other side. So I love that.
Yeah, and I have a final thought, and it's just reminded me of what you were saying. So on that topic, I think you have to prepare, and you're right, time is very limited, and you can't get to every single meeting with every single leader. But what you can do is prepare for a few, and you can have them be your voice. Mm-hmm. And I think, there's that, the book, The Multiplier Effect. I think that's a really key thing to think about when it comes to telling your story, is you can't do it on your own. So if you prepare for a few big key conversations, and then those people that you speak to will then go and spread, they're going to go and spread your story. If you do it right, if you take your time, they'll go and spread your story around other people, and then they'll find a champion that will go and spread it around other people in the company. And suddenly your story has started to infiltrate. And actually, that's actually what happened. I'm thinking about what really happened at Cisco, and that's kind of how it happened.
That makes me also, that's so brilliant. It also makes me think of this idea, if you don't know what story you're telling, or if you don't have a cohesive story that is easily repeatable, that you're selling the same vision every time you talk to someone. I think with advocacy, sometimes we do say you can, pie in the sky, you can kind of collaborate with your customers in any way you want. There's really no limits. However, if you end up showcasing 30 different metrics of how you interact with the organization, but you don't have that consistent story of like, this is exactly what this program is about, or what this practice is about, and here's exactly where it plays into the impact of the organization, I think you can actually muddy your story, and people then can't go and do the multiplier effect because the story is too complex and too complicated for them to tell.
So true. Yeah.
This has been so great, Cristina. You are a wealth of wisdom. Thank you so much. I do think we had some issues with the video. If you were looking online, we apologize for any time the video was cutting in and out. Obviously, the audio is still there, so hopefully you came along for the ride anyway. And we will release it with the video later, so you can watch our faces if that's important to you. But yeah, Deena's doing peace sign if you missed that. So thank you so much for joining with us today, Cristina. And thank you for always, you're such a giver. This is what I think about you when I'm on calls. You're so willing to share. We were just talking about how sometimes people, when they have success, try and keep it close. There's many reasons for that. They're not all selfish reasons, but there's many reasons for that. But Cristina, you are someone who always has been willing to go out and tell that story and just share your experiences with people. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Liz and Deena. It's always a real pleasure talking to you. I feel like it's just chatting to friends.
It is.
Combo. And but yeah, no, I am. I sort of like, that is kind of like, I suppose the one thing that I've always really focused on is like helping others. That's kind of like one of my top values is helping others. My second is freedom, but that's for another conversation.
Thank you. All right, ladies, everyone, thank you for listening in. Have a wonderful week, and go find that story you need to tell and tell it loud and proud. And we will see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Liz. Bye, Deena.
Bye.